Does it feel weird being down here? Does it feel weird sitting out here? I know I saw you walking down. I'm like, get up there. No. Yeah, I figured that we. Okay, well, good evening. Welcome to our Wednesday midweek Bible study. We're looking at studying characters of the Bible. Tonight we're going to be continuing to look at Joseph. And we started last week kind of going overview of Joseph, and tonight we're going to continue into Joseph and look at some of the settings. And I think that it's an amazing character study. I think one of the richest ones I can find. I think Moses is one that we'll get to that's going to be pretty amazing. But when we look at Joseph, there's so many layers to the story that every time I keep going through it, and looking at it, it's hard to just not extract everything because there's so much. So I hope that I'm not going to overlook some of the important aspects. Eileen, Terrell, good to have you with us this evening. I do have the comments up so I can interact with them, so I hope that you will engage with it as we continue this study. Let's go and have a word of prayer, and then we'll get started. Our most beautiful and merciful Father, thank you ever so much for all that you do for us, what you continue to do for us, and what we have to look forward to. We have been blessed beyond our measure, and many times the things which we just seem to take for granted are truly a blessing. We hope, Father, that this evening we'll be able to put aside the things that we've been thinking and dwelling about as we've gotten ready to be a part of this class so that we can listen to the words and the lessons, and we'll be able to pull out some important thoughts and meaning that we may have overlooked in the past, and looking at Joseph and his life and all the things that happened. We hope that you'd be with those who aren't able to join us tonight that wish to be with us. We pray that you would help them to, if it's due to illness or other problems, that you'd help to remove those from causing them to be separated from us. And we ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. So, let's start out by taking a look at, again, the setup. When we talk about, and we're in Genesis 37. And I thought of this neat little, I put it up there on a slide, is family. It's complicated because it is. And I don't think you could find one up to this level in the Bible. Maybe David and his own family, when we look at David as a character and his family dynamics. So we have a father named Jacob. Jacob is the one that's been renamed Israel. Israel is because he wrestled with God. He contended with God and man, and he prevailed. But we know his character, his whole name even means one who deceives, one who supplants, that takes away. And that's what he did. And the first part of his life, remember, he was 70 years old when he finally goes back to Padran, and then it works for his uncle, who's looks like it's a genetic trait. His uncle is conniving as he is. Works for his uncle, thinks he's going to marry one, Rachel, and then turns around, ends up marrying Leah, gets a little trick there, ends up with two wives, and then the race is on. The complexity of the family dynamic just seems to explode. And I really don't think there was enough book to write on all the little bickering and problems that were going on while we're just getting a superficial story of the birth of the sons and the drama between Leah and Rachel back and forth. And we pointed out that even the names of Leah's sons indicate her strong desire to be accepted and loved by Jacob, who doesn't love her. I don't think he hated her. I don't think it's that. But man, he had an affinity towards Rachel. But Rachel initially is barren. And so she gives her handmaid, which a lot of people, there's still some discussion by scholars whether she was a legitimate concubine or just remained kind of a weird relationship, handmaid type relationship. Doesn't matter. It just created more drama. And then this back and forth where Leah had a bunch of kids. She had hers first, Leah was able, the Lord saw that she wasn't loved, and the Lord opens up her womb, and she starts having children, and then she stops, and then Rachel can't, so she has Bilhah go ahead and have some sons, and then back and forth and all this. Then we see some drama between Reuben and Leah and all this going on. It just constantly. And so now, after the reunion with Esau, when Jacob comes back, we see the Lord is providing for Jacob. and Jacob comes back, and once he's established, and we jumped over to starting out with chapter 37 and looking at him living in the land of Canaan, and that's where he came back and started living there. And then it starts. It's interesting how now Moses is the writer. So if you hear me say the writer Moses, they believe all scholars believe he was the writer. Says these are the generations, but it's interesting that he doesn't really go through and name them typically like the way we see generations would be listed. So and so begot. But it starts out and just says these are the generations of Jacob. But then it starts out right away, brings up Joseph. Now remember, this is a little bit of hindsight. So God is revealing to us the story after it's already occurred. And he's telling the story as it unfolds, but we need to understand as well that this story has already occurred. So what is God's promise? God's promise has been to Eve to bring forward a descendant that would then eventually defeat Satan and help reconcile us, bring this king. It promised to Abraham to bring a nation forward and bless all nations. And then that was passed on to Isaac. From Isaac, it goes to Jacob. And then all of a sudden we come to Joseph. And I've always tried to look at where's this seed line going? And that will help explain a story that seems to interrupt the telling of Joseph's life between Judah and Tamar. It's just like all of a sudden it's like, whoa, we get this real crude story. But we'll talk a little bit about that. But remember, he's also not only telling us about God's providing exactly what he's promised, and he had told Abraham something very instrumental, and it's being fulfilled right now, and that's that it was going to be his people would go off into captivity, into a foreign nation, serve foreign people for 400 years, and then they would come out. Now, I don't think they sat around and they got what was happening. Many times, God has promised us a lot of things, and we don't sit around and go, there it is. Yep, this is it. Here it's happening. Yep, here we go. We're going down that path. This is what's going on. This is one that, very clearly, I truly believe Jacob absolutely knew what Abraham knew. That his descendants at some point would go into captivity and then serve there 400 years and come out. But as this unfolds, I don't think they saw this happening until the very end. And so we pick up with Joseph. Now, anybody remember who's Joseph's mother? A little louder so we can. Rebecca. And she's a favorite. She was the one that was loved, right? She only has 2 children. And Joseph's one, and then Benjamin. Benjamin, apparently at this point right now, is very, very young. We don't hear from him really. We know he's already been born because she dies in birth. So we're not sure how old he is at this point, but he is absolutely the youngest. And Joseph, so you can see this affinity towards Joseph and Benjamin. And that's what kind of sets this stage and this strife between the brothers that we saw and looked at last week, was the idea that, here you have this young man, and he's described how old he is. He's 17 years old. So we know a starting point of when, approximately, when he's going to end up going to Egypt, and how many years we'll be able to look at later, how long he spends in Egypt. And so we find that he had some abilities. He is pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. So now those are Asher, Gad, Dan, and Naphtali. But we know that Reuben and Judah are involved in this story. So I started wondering why it lists these 2 concubines, in a sense, or stepmoms, as one that's with them. And I think that this is the point of contention. Because as we look tonight, as we look at this problem, as it unfolds, who are the key characters in this? It's going to be Reuben and Judah. And you got to kind of keep your eye on the ball on this, if we're going to look, and we're trying to look and say, well, who is this next going to go to if it's gone from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Who's next? And this is where all of a sudden we see we never hear a direct name mentioned in conversation and God talking directly to the next seed line saying, Judah, you are now going to be, I will be your God, and your God of all my people, and through you, we don't hear that again. And I think because we're seeing a nation born, but it's very specific. But I have a question to pose is why Judah? We know it's going to come through Judah. How do I know that? Well, the promise was that Judah would always rule. Judah would be the tribe, and then the blessing later. But when we look at this engagement and his behavior, it's kind of like, and especially after Tamar, what he does with his daughter-in-law, it's like, again, we're always looking and trying to figure out, how would you pick the seed line? You want royal blood. You want this perfect little genetic linkage. That just look at all these wonderful people. You look at all the kings. You look at all our presidents. You look at all the rulers. There's a bunch of corrupt ones and all sorts of strange ones. But if God was in charge, you'd say, let's make sure they're pure. They're like a Joseph, and Joseph is not a part of the seed line for the Messiah. And it's like, that's kind of disappointing, isn't it? I mean, if you know about Joseph by now, unless you're just dialing in and you never heard of him, I've always thought, what, all that he went through? And so these are the things that many times when we're, learning about God or we're studying God or we know his promises, a lot of times we look at things like that and go, is that the best way? What was up with that? And I think that's kind of the point, is that this conflict that we're going to dive into is something that you would think is just so distracting and taking away from God fulfilling his promises, being hindrances. And yet every hindrance you see that man throws up, God uses to fulfill. And amazingly. And so in verse 3 there, we see where Joseph's a tattletale. We talked about it, and I think, John, what you were saying is, he's a young man. He's 17. I mean, he's not really, he's wanting to be accepted. And I think this strife between his brothers, he's doing everything he can to try to be accepted. We can tell by his character that he is a very moral boy. He's very righteous. But I think the challenge here is that he's not mature enough to handle this conflict. And that's what kind of backfires on him. So they give him a bad report. We see the partialism again, the partiality that he shows Joseph does not help Joseph at all. It creates more animosity, doesn't it, between the brothers? To the point, where it says, that they hated him, So this favoritism led their brothers to hate him even more. It said they witnessed his love. And I think that meant witnessed his favor. And that favoritism and attention was something that was bothersome and jealousy. So that's another problem with young boys in competition with one another. How horrible was it that Jacob was giving his favoritism, or how was it perceived from the brothers? Either way. But I'll tell you what, making him that special coat didn't help, did it? That coat just seemed to be the lightning rod. Because that coat was not just, when we were growing up in Bible class, this coat of many colors and all this. It was also a coat that reflected a status of prestige. And apparently the way that it's listed down. And what's interesting is, we're always raised that it was a coat of many colors, but it was a coat that was really more of status. I think that's more of it, but that's fine. But it set him apart even more so. The irony is it's also going to be something that is going to be used against Jacob, because when that coat comes back to him, it's going to be torn to shreds with blood on it. And this whole thing again, Jacob's not getting away from deception, is he? He's being deceived. again, it's coming back. All his dynamics of what's been going on in his family, it's kind of coming back to him as well. So they hated him so bad that they couldn't even talk to him without, being evil. That's bad. Now, and that's what I mean. I mean, it's one thing if people don't like you, but it's another thing if they don't like you and they're telling you. You can tell. Every time I talk to you, I'm not very friendly with you. I turn you off, I insult you, I belittle you. That's what they were doing to him. So when I come back and think about Joseph again, I'm going, well, wait a minute, Joseph, you didn't get that? I mean, every time you told a joke, they just said you're dumb. Every time you tried to do something nice or did anything, they ridiculed you, they made fun of you, they talked bad about you. So then when we get to the idea of him then having these dreams, which I still do believe, I think those were meant for him and between him and God. These were not dreams that were necessarily to be told. Or maybe they were. There's a part of it that's like God said, yeah, tell them and watch the way they respond, because this is going to come back, isn't it? We know with a lot of force, every one of these family members, the way they responded to him in his dreams are going to be kneeling to him. It's going to be a long time down the road. So the way they respond. But I think there's a part where he just expresses it and doesn't understand it. But and it's not just one dream either, is it? The first one is sheaves being bound up, and then all the other sheaves, which indicating his brothers were going to bow down to him. And like I said, Joseph is so far down the pecking order, every one of those 11 brothers would have to die before he'd have hope of getting any type of prestige. And yet your dream, you're telling, and then I could see them thinking, you little punk, you think you're hot anyway, because look how you are with Dad. Somehow, do you think God, with Jacob, our father is going to give you something more because he likes you so much? Or is he? I mean, don't you remember what Dad told us, what he did to his brother? I mean, Dad told us how he stole the birthright from our uncle and how he took the blessing. Now this little Joseph is, all tied in with Dad. And if Dad's done this once, what if he does it again and decides, Reuben, you're the oldest, but guess what? Joseph's the man. So you could just, and I don't think it's crazy for me to think that, because you can know that as these young men are out there sitting around, these boys and these brothers, talking, all the stuff they probably came up with. And just, they fed on that. And that just made it worse and worse. So there may have been that extreme jealousy, thinking, you know what? Dad might just make him in charge. Until then all of a sudden he has a dream about the stars and the moon, indicating that even his parents, Jacob himself, would bow down to him. And Jacob gets upset, doesn't he, when he tells him. And so this dream causes him to hate him more. Now, this is after the first dream, verse 5 through 7. But he goes ahead and he tells him another one, doesn't he? He tells him the second dream. And then even Jacob gets upset. But look at the last part of that verse, 11. But Jacob, his father, he kept this saying in mind. Have you heard that before? This type of thought or statement? Mary, the mother of Jesus, many times you see where people that are spiritual, that are aware of God's word, that even though their initial pushback on something and they observe something, I think we do this. We kind of put that in our hearts and go, okay, well, I wonder what this might mean. So I think that's what we're being told here, is that Jacob, some level, was saying, maybe this is something. Because remember, he's still a patriarch of the family, and Reuben is the man who should be receiving everything. And so, and there's no indication, we're never told anywhere, where Jacob is ever thinking that he's going to elevate Joseph over all the other brothers. But this is still because he's bothered by it. So he keeps this saying in his mind and he remembers it. So now we get to the point where he ends up, the major conflict that explodes is him end up being sold to slavery. And we'll pick up in verse 12 of chapter 37 and read there. Now his brothers went to the pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. And he said to him, here I am. So he said to him, go now, see if it is well with your brothers, and check the flock and bring me word. So how do you think Jacob was using Joseph? Joseph oblivious to the fact that his brothers don't like him? I know there was this type of a drama, a little bit of a relationship with between my three sons, and also my brothers. And I guarantee you, if you went to my little brother and you had him come check on me and my older brother, whew, he's the wrong guy to ask, because we know he's a sellout. And you would know, and I would think my mom or my dad would know, but he would also be the one that would do it. My little brother would do it, you know? I mean, you could see this type of dynamic to where, you know, Jacob should have known there's this animosity between them. How could he not miss it? I mean, how could he miss this and go, oh, well, this is going to be fine for Joseph?
Well, on the other side, maybe he was also thinking, maybe if I get them all together at one time, maybe they'll start talking to one another and be kind. I mean, there's another side to it.
Yeah, I think it's stronger. The other one is that you're sending Joseph to the lions. You're sending him out there. And it's not like it's down the corner of the block where they're playing football. You know, it's not like, I mean, you're talking about a walk that he's going to go. And you know these brothers don't like him. They can't talk nice to him. And if they couldn't talk nice to him in front of his face, I'll bet you that even when Jacob was standing around, he could hear the animosity between them that was going on. And the fact that he is asking Joseph to go and tell me what's going on. Give me a report. Check on him. Does that tell you something about, does he trust those boys that are with the sheep? Gary?
Of course, you have to remember they said he was 17 years old.
Well, yeah, by this time,
Kind of naive.
yes, he's got it.
Maybe wanting his brothers to like him. You know, I can see a 17-year-old.
Well, that's why I thought it was interesting the way that when he asked, he says, here am I, here I am. You know, like he's eager to do it. It's like,
I don't think the dad, the Jacob himself, was the cause of everything. He knows. He was declaring his love publicly to Joseph. He never he didn't give a damn like the other brothers don't like it. And you were declaring your love more and more like every day to this young boy. So I don't know, I may be wrong, but I think he was comfortable with that kind of relationship. If he wasn't comfortable because he's used to it already, like from his own childhood, he did it to his own brother, his elder brother. They were living apart like for so many years. I think he's used to that kind of thing because if you ask me, every father, even if you love one child so much, you don't just declare it to other children, like show it out, giving him coat of many colors, making them know that, oh, this is my child, I love him so much. I mean, you don't do that because, I think he was comfortable with the kind of relationship they were having. I don't know.
well, he was, but there was a consequence to it that I don't understand. Either he didn't understand what it was, the dynamic that was going on, and maybe it was so well hidden from Jacob that he didn't see all that animosity that was happening, and he continued in that relationship. But either way, it was setting forth something that was putting Joseph in a predicament.
And we don't know how much God had to do with it either. How much influence God had over what was going on. it seemed like he kind of used the way they were anyway. They were going to do kind of this stuff anyway, but maybe, I still think maybe he had a little bit of input into what was going on and the way it was going.
You mean Jacob?
Jacob and Joseph, and maybe even the brother.
Well, Jacob's got to be close to 97.
There.
No, he's probably 90. He's a little younger, sorry. Because we know that Joseph's going to spend close to 30, 40 years. And so he dies, I think 127 is when Jacob will die. So he's definitely 90 or so, 89. And even for that, even though they lived long, doesn't mean that he's in his prime, and engaged. And we have to look at the brothers too, the selfishness. They would know that his mother was the favorite wife. And there's only two of them. And everybody else is not as important to Dad. None of them. Those who came from Leah, their names reflect that, remember? Hey, Mom, where'd you get my name? Oh, because your father didn't love me. So there would be this residual kind of strife. So there's a part that we got to put on the brothers that jealousy that may not have been as gross as we might think. In other words, that Jacob was flaunting it or making it, but it was genuine, and it may not have been that bad, but it's natural. These are things, and I think that's what is kind of I want us to remember, is that this is real family dynamics. This is stuff that happens. It happened between him and Esau. Dad liked Esau, Isaac liked Esau, Mom liked him. And I see that in all families. I think every parent has, whether they admit it or not, one that they can relate to a little better and a little closer, and they might, without even understanding it, show that type of comfort of love to them more so than the other one. And some of that's, but it's what is going to set forward this tragic event. And this all goes back, honestly, if you think about it, to sin, all the way around. Everything about this is rooted in sin. It goes all the way back to the sin that Jacob committed, from the deception and all that his mother did, even though God had promised, and trying to make things happen, to the sin that was going on, when he was with Laban, the things that happened there. And then when you look at all the marital chaos, that God never intended that. God had set it up for one man, one woman. He never endorsed it. So all of this stuff develops us in a culture that we're affected by it. And I'm not judging Jacob any harsher. It's just every one of us in our families, we're raising our families. This is ultimately the root. Is the boys grew up, and even Jacob, in a little bit selfishness of me first. And that has set the motion, the direction of this conflict, which is mirrored out, I think, in every generation and in some ways in all families. So what I'm saying is we see God is sitting there trying to fix the sin problem, and we, in our sinfulness, seem to be just thrown at a curve. The resultants of our choices and things. But the glory to God is he takes whatever it is, and he's going to be faithful, and he's going to fulfill it. But I think he sees something in Joseph. There's something about Joseph, because we know Joseph is going to fulfill one of the greatest prophecies, and that is to provide safety and take his people out into this foreign country and provide for them. And everything we're going to see is providential. In other words, it's not miraculous, but it's something the way God is providing for this man, this young man, and his moral character is what is helping to overcome the evil around him, trying to shift him away. And I honestly think Satan, from the beginning, has always tried to find that seed line and stop it. Why wouldn't he? He heard it in the garden. He knows that somebody from Eve's descendant, one of her descendants, is going to be the one that's going to put him down. So every child that's born is coming along until he hears a conversation. He doesn't have the ability to know the future. But every conversation, when he hears God talk to Abraham, aha, Abraham. And then whenever it was Isaac, aha, Isaac. And we see a lot of the conflict around the stories almost like he is trying to stop this seed line. And there's a moment later on, much further down in the history of the kings, where sin almost does it. But God's still faithful. So this is one I think that was kind of where Satan thought, man, Jacob really likes Joseph. Maybe this is the kid. And using this opportunity, and the next thing you know, he gets sold off. But I think that God is not going to be stopped. That's the greatest part about this story, I think, is. But to send him off, so he wants him to go and check not only what his brothers are doing, but also the fact that how's the herd? How's the flock? So give me a report. That's saying they may not be doing such a good job. Does he have faith in those brothers that he can't? And I don't know about the location, but we know that starting in 12, so he sent him to from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem, and he found a man there wandering in the fields, and he asked him, "What are you seeking?" He said, "I'm seeking my brothers." He said, "Tell me, please, where are they pasturing the flock?" And the man said, "They've gone away. I heard him say, 'Let's go down to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers, and he found them at Dothan. So now they're not where they should be, or at least we don't know that they were necessarily supposed to move them, but they're definitely not going to be there. I don't know if that's something that might have helped aggravate the brothers when they're not at Shechem like they told Dad they're going to be, and they didn't send a message back and say, "Hey, Dad, we're going to move them and go and pasture them somewhere else." Because I would think that would be kind of important, to keep, the patriarch informed of what we're doing. But because if something was to happen and they needed to find out where they're at and go do something, Jacob needed to know where they were always at. And somehow they've gone down to Shechem where Jacob thinks they're at, and they're not. And so now there's a different location, Dothan. And when he finds them there, this is when they don't even have, all they got to do is just see him walking up, right? Just see him coming. That's what it says in 18. And they saw him from afar. And before he came near, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these pits. And we'll say that a fierce animal devoured him. And we will see what will become of his dreams." So now we know very precisely, it's not just the spoiled status, his special relationship with Dad, that it's this arrogance. They perceive that because of these dreams. But they start immediately once they see him. They must think that, well, we're far enough away, we can get away with this. But that's pretty bad. I mean, when you see somebody and your hatred is so bad that you want to kill them. It made me think about Jesus when he talked about all the sins, and everybody talks about, well, do not murder, do not commit adultery. And he says, no, I tell you, it's here. It's in the heart. That is where it's at. Because you think it first, and then it comes out. And that's what I thought of with these boys, is that they've been working it so hard in the heart that now it's coming out. And now they're going to act upon it.
I think that is why I get confused about the way God does his things. Because if you ask me, Jacob, from childhood till he became a man, I can't find anything good about him. Like, you had a wife who gave you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 children for so many years and you never loved her. And in the presence of those children, they saw their mother being maltreated, not being loved, like a second class in the house. And you want those kids to be happy? Like, everything about Jacob's life is just, and I still don't know why God still decide to call himself a God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob.
Yeah, why don't we minimize that last one, right? Isaac? Okay. There's nothing we have.
Right.
Abraham? Yeah. We get it. Abraham, good man.
Yeah.
Isaac, can't say anything really horrible about him. And that's what's fascinating to me is how much that we find out we have written about Jacob's life. A borderline scoundrel guy, right? Like you were saying. And then the chaos that's created within his own family dynamic. But we also see that time and time again, where a lot of times where God is using people that sometimes the external, what we see, is not what we would accept. And a good example of that is Saul, King Saul. Exactly. Because that's exactly what God told Samuel, wasn't it? He goes, you're judging by the outside. I judge what's in the inside. And I think there was a core of goodness within him. Just like sinners. We all are not justified. Nothing we do is good in a lot of ways. Because it's sin, we have it. Any sin is sin, and sin separates us. We can look at some and say, you got more than I do. But do you? Does it matter? No, it doesn't. But Jacob had something. There's something about Jacob that, I don't know, that it's hard because we see the outside of him and it's so easy to pick on him. And rightfully so. It's not like we can justify the stuff he did. Gary.
So the way man thinks is not the way God thinks.
And that's so true.
What was that? The ways of man are not the ways of God.
I think that is one of the biggest storylines here. Everything from the family dynamics to way God takes care of Joseph, and yet Joseph never becomes a part of the seed line of Jesus. But Judah does, who is so deceptive with his own daughter-in-law, and it's through that incestuous type of relationship with Tamar that Reuben becomes the seed line. Not even, I think it was Reuben. Well, the descendant of Tamar, that relationship with them, comes through that direction, not even Reuben. I mean, there's 11 of them he could have picked. But we have this crazy story. That's why it's so amazing. You're reading this story about Jacob and Joseph and the brothers, and then all of a sudden, right when at the end of this story where he's finally going off, bam, we jump over and we get this story about Judah and Tamar and his evil sons.
It's nearly like God has a big picture and we're looking at each individual little thing. Doesn't make any sense. But there's an overall plan. God has a big picture of what's happening.
And I think that's what always used to disturb me is I would read this story about Joseph and all of a sudden would get this really horrific story about the way Judah and his sons and Tamar and how he treated her and almost had her burned. But he's the one that slept with her. And he's the one that impregnated her. And then the seed line comes through her and him. And we got to talk about that because you just can't, sometimes we like to jump over that. Like if you're teaching this to kids, Joseph's story, I guarantee you, I don't think of any children's Bible teacher that would sit and put that story of Judah and Tamar in the middle and then go back over into Potiphar's house and talk the rest of the story of Joseph. And I don't think it's random. I don't think Moses goes, oh yeah, let's insert Judah and Tamar in here. I think it's very key. And that's why we're going to try to bring that together, because we got to look at Judah. We want to look at Judah, and I want us to look at Reuben as we go through here. Because even though they're not mentioned that much, there's some key things that we see. We've already identified that it's Bilhah and I forgot her other, Zilpah, sons that seem to be that main conflict. But Reuben and Judah are not. But they're older. Reuben's the firstborn. And so they're the ones that have a different dynamic in this, and they try to intervene in this, but at the same time, they're not stopping it. They actually aid and abet in it. They seem to go around it as older brothers even. These younger brothers, I think, Asher and them are the ones that are saying, let's kill him. You know, they're the younger brothers. But then Reuben and Judah but Judah, what did he do? He sold him. He's the one that come up with the plan. So you're right. I mean, so when we look at this, we're like, that's another thing that why I think that God is so true. Because he's so honest. He doesn't try to cover it up. You know, most gods, like the Greek gods and pagan gods, they're perfect. Everything they do from the way they do things is the way it should be. They're not honest. God is brutally honest with his own people. And he tells us ourselves even today in his kingdom, we are still broken and we're sinners and we're unworthy. But he loves us and he has saved us and he's redeemed us. And that is one of these great themes I think we see in this. That's why I said, even today as I sat down and started going through it again, you know, for tonight I kept seeing all these layers and the complexity of this story and the greatness of God working out his fulfillment of his promises, his love, and his ability to see things that you and I can't grasp. It's just beyond what we can kind of grasp. So they're bitter. We know it's his dreams. But then this is where in 21, but when Reuben heard it, so he's the firstborn, and who's the firstborn of? Leah. Judah's the other. So it's kind of interesting, the two older brothers, but Reuben, the firstborn, says, Reuben heard it, and he rescued him out of their hands, saying, let us not take his life. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood. Throw him in this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him later to his father. So his plan was, get him out of their hands, put him in this well. It sounds cruel, but honestly, if they put him down there, it's going to be hard for them to get him out, and they'll cool their jets. And after they cool their jets, Reuben's plan was, I'm going to come back, I'll pull him out, and I'll get him back to dad. I used to always think, Reuben, you're a part of the problem, but when you really look at this, Reuben is trying.
He's going along with it, and then says, I know in the back of my mind, I'm going to go save him. Yeah. He's pretending he's going to go along with it.
But he doesn't stand up for Joseph, does he? No. It's like he should have been able to say, look, you're wrong, leave the boy alone. He's doing what he's told. He's just a young 17-year-old, just leave him alone. This is not right thinking, this anger of yours. But he kind of his plan goes aside, because put him down in this pit, let's put him down there.
They would have jumped him if
they might have.
I mean, there's more of them than him.
Yeah, and we don't know what their relationship is, right? Because of the dynamic. So 23. So when Joseph had come to his brothers, they stripped him off his robe, they attacked him, the robe of many colors that he wore, and they took him and they threw him in a pit. And the pit was empty. There was no water in it. Well, that's nice.
Yeah.
At least it's dry. Yeah. But I think what's crazy is here's this boy down in the pit, right? And then his brothers says, we're up there eating. And they look up as they're sitting there eating, probably talking smack about their brother, right?
Sure.
Teasing him. I'm sure they're throwing some tease at, hey, how's the dreaming going down there, boy? Got any more dreams now, Mr. Leaf Stander-Upper? Are you so hot now? Hey, where's that beautiful coat of yours? Oh, here it is. And then they're sitting around, probably feeling kind of full of themselves, and they look up and they see this caravan of salespeople, or basically,
Ishmaelites.
what?
Ishmaelites.
You know, they're called Midianites too, but we'll talk about that. But they see this caravan of salespeople, basically. They know where they're going. They knew everything. I mean, you out in that desert area, when you saw people traveling, you got used to it, kind of like the freeway. Like I can tell you when the trains travel at 11 o'clock at night because I hear it blowing at my house. I know. So, they probably saw this. They knew who they were. So they look up, they see a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, and their camels bearing gum, balm, mirth, and on their way to carry down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, what profit is if we kill our brother or conceal his blood? So I think they were still talking death. They may have even, it seems like Judah is either gone or somewhere because he's not there. But Judah, I think, is seeing that they're about ready to rope the boy, bring him up, and kill him. Go ahead and finish it off. I don't think they're cooling down at all. So Judah, his thought is, well, let's just sell him off. Why is that better? You don't kill him.
Well, he's still alive. He didn't tell the father that they killed him. He's somewhere. I don't know where he is. He wandered off.
But it's almost as torturous for Joseph, not thinking about what that poor young boy is going to have to endure. You might as well kill him. Honestly. Because if you think about, look at the things he goes through and the way he sees things. God never comes and talks to him and goes, Joseph, it's okay. We're working this out. You're good. We never hear him talk to him directly. We see his faith. We see his struggle because he names his own children. He names his children. That he's been blessed by being abandoned, by the fact that, his children reflect the hurt. Ephraim and Manasseh reflect the fact that he is hurt from what has happened to him and the fact that he's still down in Egypt and nobody's come to try to get him. So they decide to go ahead and let's don't kill him, because look at it, conceal his blood. How are you going to cover that up? So let's sell him. Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. Let not lay a hand on him, for he is our brother, he's our own flesh, and his brothers listen to him. So, who are the Ishmaelites? Their family. Now, I've seen some say this is the Midianites, which is one of Abraham's sons by Kutra. After later on, he had 6 other kids. But still, the Ishmaelites, who this is their great uncle. So they sell him to him, and they pass him on. So they draw him up. The Midianite. See, this is what's interesting. The Midianite traders passed by. That's what was interesting. I couldn't quite discern. But the Midianites were, how do you say it? They were nomads. They also traveled and traded as well. So they lifted him up out of the pit, sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and he saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes, returned to his brothers, and he said, the boy is gone, where shall I go? So he goes to the pit. I think they've already moved on, away from the pit. 8 probably went on. Reuben goes back, looks in the pit, he's gone. And he goes to them, where am I going to? So where shall I go? It's almost like, what am I going to do? What are we going to do with this problem? And that was one of the greatest things. He says, so they took his robe, slaughtered a goat, dipped the robe in blood, and they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father. And they said, we have found, this we have found. Please identify, is it your son's robe or not? And he identified it, and he said, this is my son's robe. The fierce animals devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. So,
because they didn't think his father would ever see him again anyway.
yeah, he's gone. He's going to go into slavery. He's gone. But that's something you cannot cover up, is a conscience. You know, people who sin and get involved in sin, a lot of times they think, well, it's okay. Eventually, it's okay. The passion of them wanting to destroy this young man overwhelmed their conscience of thought that I'm going to have to live with this. You're not going to just get away with this. This is always going to be there. So Jacob mourns. He tears his garments, put on sackcloth on his loins, and he mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. He said, no, I shall go down to Sheol to my son, mourning. Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard. And then we jump to Tamar and Judah. We'll talk a little bit more next week about it because I think that, like I said, there's a real important link in this. I mean, you can skip it, a lot of times it's done, and just go jump to the next chapter and go right into Potiphar and the rest of his life. But I think this helps us to see the complexity and dynamics of the relationships and what's going to happen to Judah and the role Judah's going to play at the end of this when he's finally revealed. So,
Well, I have a question. So we know that marriages back then, it wasn't a wedding ceremony, basically. And so what is the difference in that in saying that the concubines weren't his wives too? Because he did the same thing. He went into the, why are they not considered wives when it was the same ceremony that they went into?
Concubines did not have the same equality and status. That's it. There was a
They're still
difference.
woman.
I know, but I'm just explaining the culture. Not justifying it. I'm explaining. You know what I mean? Because it's just as wrong. But and that's why there's discussion. You know, when I'd read some scholars, some of them would say, well, they never really became culturally a concubine, but then some say, yeah, they were concubines. And it's not a very...
I know that's what Scripture says, but I'm saying, why aren't they considered a wife? I mean, Scripture says they were concubines.
I think one, because it's wrong.
Well,
I don't think God ever really wanted them to be called a wife. And to have multiple wives did nothing but create chaos. I mean, and that's where some people have said polygamy is legal. Then why don't some of these that are polygamous have concubines? You see? Because really, you're right. I mean, if you're going to have the same intimate relationship with them, and that's what basically God sees as this bond, but we have to dive into the ceremonial, the legal side of a culture is how they identify what is a marriage, and then what God does. So you can be married in a culture that says you're a wife and you have that status, but not by God. You can divide it out however you want, but God's going to say, no, this is what I define as a wife, as a one husband, one man, and he never changed that. There's nowhere you can say that God said, more than one wife's okay. Never. And every time you see that they have them, it's nothing but conflict and tragedy. So to fragment it off into what we would call concubines is, you're still taking advantage of an intimate relationship that you should not be having. But culturally, they just kind of did not give them the same equality of treatment, relationship status, and they were probably treated more as a servant. But yeah, and matter of fact, it's going to be neat because next week we're going to look at Potiphar's wife and the huge difference in the way the Egyptians and their marriages and their women, way different from the Hebrews and the Canaanites. So, and why that helped us set up what happened between Joseph and Potiphar's wife. Why she's able to be in that, because a total different type of culture and their way they viewed marriages. So, all right, thank you very much. We went a little bit long, but great conversation. I hope that you enjoyed it. Hope to see you 9:45 this Sunday morning, continuing the Bible study of Acts, and then that afternoon, 4 p.m. as well. So, hope to see you soon. God bless.